Martha's hands were covered in blood. Her husband lay dying in a canyon, a bullet through his lung. Their 4-year-old daughter had just been kidnapped, and the man responsible stood 20 yards away with a gun pointed at them both. She had one shot, one chance, and if she missed, everyone she loved would die tonight. But to understand how a mail-order bride ended up here, rifle in hand, we need to go back to a train platform in 1876. If you enjoy stories like this, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. The dress didn't fit. Martha Eleanor Wright stared at her reflection in the train depot's cracked mirror and wanted to disappear into the warped glass. The calico fabric strained across her bosom, buttons gaping like open mouths. The waist cut into her flesh with each breath. 3 months ago, when she'd sewn this dress in her cold Montana room, the measurements had been different. But cheap bread at every stop, greasy bacon for breakfast, the weight of grief and desperation had added pounds she couldn't afford. Through the dust-streaked window, she could see him. Caleb Hayes, the rancher. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving across the platform with the easy confidence of a man who'd never known hunger or shame. He was scanning faces, looking for someone. Looking for the woman in the daguerreotype she'd sent 3 months prior. The woman who was 20 pounds lighter. The woman who didn't exist anymore. "Mama," Grace tugged her skirt, her small voice cutting through the thunder of Martha's heartbeat. "Why are we hiding?" "Because mothers are cowards too," Martha thought. "Because I can already see the disappointment on his face when he realizes what he paid for." But she couldn't say that. Not to a 4-year-old whose left foot turned inward with each painful step, whose whole world was the woman standing frozen in front of a cracked mirror. "We're not hiding, baby." Martha smoothed Grace's blonde curls with trembling fingers. "Mama just needed a moment to decide." The return ticket sat in her reticule, paid for with the last of her savings. She could get back on that train. Return to Montana, to the laundry room where her hands cracked and bled in lye water, where Grace slept on a pallet behind the boiler because they couldn't afford a real room. Grace would grow up poor, but at least she wouldn't see the disgust on a stranger's face when he realized his mail-order bride was fat. Then Grace whispered the words that changed everything. "My foot hurts, Mama." And Martha Wright picked up her worn carpet bag and stepped out onto that platform. Because mothers don't run, even when every instinct screams to hide. The year was 1876, and Martha was about to meet her husband for the first time. But this story actually begins 42 years later in a different depot with a different train, Prescott, Arizona. October 1918. Martha Eleanor Hayes, 68 years old, stood on a platform watching her granddaughter prepare to board a train to war. Jane was 20, bright-eyed, dressed in a nurse's uniform that would take her to New York, then to France, then to trenches, where boys younger than her would die screaming for mothers who would never come. "Grandma," Jane clutched an old leather medical bag, the brass clasp worn smooth by decades of use. "Tell me again about the dress." Martha touched the girl's cheek, seeing her own fear reflected back across the years. "Child, before you go thinking war is glory, let me tell you about the war I fought in 1876. Not with rifles, though there were plenty, but with will." She settled onto the wooden bench, bones creaking, and Jane sat beside her. "It started with a dress that didn't fit. Isn't that just like life? The things that break us are often so small." Arizona Territory, 1876. The platform boards creaked under Martha's weight as she stepped into the afternoon sun. The heat hit her like a physical blow after months of Montana cold. Tucson sprawled before her, a collection of adobe buildings and false-fronted stores baking under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. She saw the moment Caleb Hayes spotted her. His eyes swept past her, once still searching, then returned, landing on the carpet bag in her hand, the small girl clinging to her skirts. His expression froze for a heartbeat. Not disgust, Martha cataloged with a nurse's clinical precision. Surprise. Recalculation. Then nothing. His face went carefully blank. He walked toward them, spurs jingling with each step. Clink, drag, clink, drag. The limp was slight but unmistakable. A war injury, Martha recognized. She'd seen enough of them. Up close, he was taller than she'd imagined, 6'3" at least, with shoulders broad enough to block the sun. His face was weathered, prematurely gray at the temples, despite looking no older than his mid-30s. storm cloud eyes beneath the brim of his hat, scarred hands that spoke of hard work, and he smelled like leather and wood smoke and something sharper. Whiskey. Mrs. Wright, his voice was deep, rough-edged, not unkind, just unused to conversation. Welcome to Arizona. Martha's throat closed. She forced words through. Mr. Hayes, the photograph was 3 months old. I've changed. The truth tasted like ash. She wanted to explain. The grief weight after her aunt's death, the fear weight of answering an advertisement from a stranger, the desperation weight of having $17 and a daughter with a crooked foot and nowhere else to go. Caleb Hayes looked at her for a long moment. His gaze traveled from her face to her straining dress to Grace hiding behind her skirts, then back to her eyes. We all change, ma'am. He reached for her carpet bag. Let me get your trunk. Not a rejection, not acceptance either, just practicality. Martha exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. This is Grace. She nudged her daughter forward. Grace, say hello to Mr. Hayes. Grace peeked out, clutching her mother's skirt with both hands. Hello, she whispered. Caleb crouched, bringing himself to the child's eye level. The movement was smooth despite the limp. Hello, Miss Grace. Did you have a good journey? My foot hurts. Grace's honesty was brutal as always. Martha felt heat flood her face. Grace, that's honest. Caleb's lips twitched, almost a smile. He stood addressing Martha. Wagons this way. It's a bit of a ride, 10 miles up into the hills. He didn't offer his arm, didn't try to take Grace's hand, just walked toward a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses, expecting them to follow. Martha gathered Grace into her arms, ignoring the pull in her lower back, and followed. The child was getting too big to carry, but her foot couldn't manage the uneven platform boards. Caleb lifted her trunk into the wagon bed like it weighed nothing. Then he turned, and for a moment Martha thought he might try to help her up, but he just gestured to the wheel spoke. Use that for a step. She did, grateful he wasn't touching her. Grateful and somehow disappointed at the same time. She settled Grace on the bench between them, a small buffer of innocence. Caleb swung up beside them, took the reins, and clicked his tongue. The horses started forward. They left Tucson behind in silence. The road climbed into mountains that made Martha's breath catch despite everything else. Peaks rose around them, covered in dark pine. A creek rushed alongside the rutted pathwater so clear she could see stones on the bottom. The sky overhead was impossibly vast. First time out west? Caleb finally asked. Martha cleared her throat. Yes, first time anywhere, really. I've lived in Philadelphia my whole life, then Montana for 3 years. He glanced at her. This is going to be quite different. I'm prepared for hard work. The words came out defensive. I kept house for my aunt for years. I can cook, clean, mend, do laundry. I'm not afraid of long hours. I'm sure you are. The neutrality in his tone stung worse than criticism would have. They rode in silence for another mile. Grace hummed tunelessly a hymn Martha had taught her. The sound seemed to ease something in Caleb's shoulders. It's just me at the ranch, he said abruptly. My father died 2 years ago, left me the whole spread. 2,400 acres, 300 head of cattle, a dozen horses. That sounds like a lot to manage alone. I've got 4 ranch hands who work the cattle. They bunk in the foreman's cabin, but the main house has been empty except for me since my father passed. He kept his eyes on the road. I'm not much for housekeeping. I eat most of my meals cold out of cans. The house is a mess. I figured it was time to do something about it. So that's what I am, Martha thought. Something to do about the mess. But she said, I'll do my best to make everything comfortable for you, Mr. Hayes. Ransom, he corrected. No, wait. Caleb, we don't stand on formality out here. Then you should call me Martha. This time she definitely saw the corner of his mouth twitch, but it disappeared so quickly she might have imagined it. The road narrowed as they climbed higher. Martha gripped the edge of the wagon seat, trying not to look at the steep drop-offs. Caleb handled the horses with easy confidence, navigating turns that made her stomach flip. Finally, they crested a ridge and he pulled the horses to a stop. There, he pointed. Silver Creek Ranch. Martha looked down into a wide valley cradled between mountains. A creek sparkled in the afternoon sun, cutting through green meadows dotted with cattle. Near the creek stood a collection of buildings, a large 2-story house with a covered porch, A massive barn, several smaller outbuildings, corrals. Smoke rose from the chimney of a cabin set apart from the main house. "It's beautiful," Martha breathed, and meant it. Caleb looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "My grandfather built the house in 1861. My father expanded it. It's solid. Good place to weather any storm." They descended into the valley. As they drew closer, Martha could see details. The house was built of logs, chinked and weathered with glass windows and a solid door. The barn was enormous, its doors open to reveal stalls and hay storage. Horses grazed in one corral. Chickens scratched in a yard near the house. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the front porch and set the brake. He jumped down, came around to Martha's side. For a moment, she thought he'd leave her to manage alone. Then his hand settled on her waist, firm and steady, and he lifted her down. She was a tall woman, 5 feet 4 inches, but she barely came to his shoulder. And despite her size, he lifted her like she weighed nothing. When her feet touched ground, he released her immediately, grabbed her chin. "Come on, I'll show you the house." The front door opened into a large room that served as both parlor and dining area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Windows looked out over the valley. The furniture was heavy and masculine. A leather sofa, sturdy chairs, a large table. Everything was covered in dust. Newspapers scattered across the table along with dirty dishes and coffee cups. Muddy boot prints tracked across the wooden floor. The air smelled stale, closed in. "Like I said," Caleb sounded almost embarrassed. "It's a mess." Martha set down her bag and looked around. She'd cleaned field hospitals that smelled like gangrene and looked like slaughterhouses. This was nothing. Nothing that cannot be fixed with some work. He showed her the rest of the first floor, a kitchen with a cast iron stove and a hand pump at the sink, a pantry that was nearly empty, a small room off the kitchen that he said had been his mother's sewing room. Upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms. He pointed to one at the end of the hall. "That one's yours. It's got a good view of the mountains." He hesitated, then added, "My room's at the other end. You don't have to worry about me bothering you." Heat flooded Martha's cheeks. "I wasn't worried." "Good." He opened the door to her room. It was simply furnished: a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a chair. But it was clean with fresh linens on the bed and curtains at the window. The bed was bigger than any she'd ever slept in. "I had one of my men's wives come up and make the room ready," Caleb said. "Figured you'd want it decent." "It's perfect," Martha's voice caught. The room was bigger than the entire space she'd shared with Grace in Montana, and the window looked out over the most spectacular view she'd ever seen. Mountains turning gold in the late afternoon sun. Caleb nodded. "I'll let you get settled. Come down when you're ready and we can discuss what you'll be doing." He left his boots heavy on the stairs. Martha sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. She had done it. She had traveled across the country and arrived safely. This room was hers. This job was hers. She would make this work. Grace climbed onto the bed beside her, bouncing slightly. "Mama, I like it here." "Do you, baby?" "Mr. Caleb is nice, and there's horses. He said I could see the horses after supper." Martha pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair. Lavender soap, the same kind Martha made. The one constant thing she'd carried from Montana. "Then we'll see the horses after supper." After washing her face and hands in the basin and changing into a simpler work dress, Martha went back downstairs. She found Caleb in the kitchen attempting to make coffee. He looked up when she entered, and she was struck again by how handsome he was. Not in the smooth gentleman way of Philadelphia men, but in a rough-weathered way that spoke of survival and strength. "Let me." She moved to the stove. "You hired me to do this after all." He stepped back and she set about properly preparing the coffee. While it brewed, she explored the pantry and found some bread and jerky. She set out a simple meal on the kitchen table. They sat and Caleb ate like a man who hadn't had a decent meal in days, which was probably true. Martha watched him cataloging details. The way he held his fork, the slight tremor in his left hand when he reached for his cup, the way his eyes kept darting to the doorway as if expecting someone. Checking for threats, she realized. He's always checking for threats. War did that to a man. "Tell me about your day," Martha said. "What time do you wake up? When do you want meals?" He wiped his mouth. "I'm up at dawn, usually grab something quick and head out to work the ranch with my men. We come back around noon for lunch, then work until dark. Suppers whenever that is. I can make sure you have hot meals ready, and I'll get the house in order." She hesitated. "Is there a garden?" "There was, before my mother died. That was 15 years ago. It's overgrown now. I can try to revive it if you'd like fresh vegetables." "That would be good." He looked at her directly, and she was caught by the intensity of his gaze. Storm clouds before lightning. "I appreciate you coming all this way, Martha. I know it must have been difficult, leaving everything you knew." "I didn't have much to leave," she admitted. "My parents died when I was young. My aunt raised me, but she passed last month. I needed a fresh start." "Well, you have one here." He stood picking up his hat. The spurs jingled. Clink, drag. "I need to check on the men and make sure everything's settled for the night. Make yourself at home. Whatever you need, just let me know." After he left, Martha sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. Somewhere a horse whinnied. The wind moved through the pines with a soft, rushing sound. She could hear the distant murmur of the creek. It was so different from city noises. No rumble of carriages, no shouts of vendors, no constant press of humanity pressing in from all sides. She liked it. Over the next 3 days, Martha threw herself into making the house a home. She cleaned every room from top to bottom, scrubbing floors until her knees ached, washing windows until they sparkled, beating rugs until dust clouds filled the air. She organized the kitchen, making lists of supplies they needed. She baked fresh bread that filled the house with warmth it had been missing. She tackled the overgrown garden, pulling weeds and discovering that some herbs and a few stubborn vegetables had survived 15 years of neglect. Caleb seemed surprised by her efficiency. He would come in for meals and find the table set with hot food, the house smelling of bread or stew or fresh coffee. He didn't say much, but she caught him looking around with an expression that might have been satisfaction. On her 4th day at the ranch, Martha was in the chicken coop collecting eggs when she heard voices. She stepped outside and saw Caleb talking with 4 men near the barn. They were all dressed in work clothes, weathered and dusty from a day's labor. Caleb gestured toward the house, and the men looked over. Martha suddenly felt self-conscious in her simple dress and apron, her hair tied back with a scarf. Caleb walked over with one of the men, an older fellow with gray in his beard. "Martha, this is Tom Garrett, my foreman. Tom, this is Mrs. Wright, the new housekeeper." Tom touched his hat brim. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am. Been smelling your cooking from the cabin. My wife's going to be jealous." Martha smiled. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Garrett. You're welcome to join us for meals anytime." "That's generous, but we do all right in our cabin." He glanced at Caleb. "Boss, we need to talk about moving the herd up to the summer pasture." "Come to the house after you wash up," Caleb said. "We'll go over it." After Tom left, Caleb turned to Martha. "I should have introduced you to the men sooner. They're good workers, all of them. You don't have to worry about them." "I wasn't worried. Mr. Garrett seems kind. He's been with my family since I was a puna. He taught me everything about ranching." Caleb's expression softened slightly. "Without him, I would have lost this place when my father died. It must have been hard, taking over so young. I was 28, old enough." But his jaw tightened. "But I'd never run a ranch alone. My father always meant to teach me more, but he died suddenly. Heart gave out while he was riding fence. By the time we found him, it was too late." Martha touched his arm without thinking, a gesture of comfort. "I'm sorry." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. For a moment, something passed between them. A connection that made her breath catch. Recognition. 2 people who'd lost too much trying to build something from ruins. Then he stepped back, breaking the contact. "I should get cleaned up before Tom comes back." He walked toward the house, leaving Martha standing in the yard with her basket of eggs and her heart beating faster than it should. She told herself not to be foolish. Caleb was her employer, nothing more. He'd hired her to keep his house, not to be anything else to him. She needed this job, this place. She couldn't ruin it by developing inappropriate feelings for her boss. But over the following days, those feelings grew despite her best efforts to suppress them. She couldn't help but notice the way he moved with easy grace despite his size, the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face, the way he treated his animals and his men with respect and fairness. She learned that he was up before dawn every morning, working alongside his ranch hands, rather than standing back and giving orders. She learned that he was teaching himself to read complicated books on animal husbandry and land management determined to make the ranch thrive. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable. And every evening after supper, they began to sit on the porch together and watch the sun set behind the mountains. At first, they sat in silence. Then they began to talk. Small things at first. Martha told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her aunt's seamstress shop, about learning to read from newspapers left behind by customers. Caleb told her about the ranch, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the time he and his father drove cattle to Denver and got caught in a blizzard. On her 12th day at the ranch, Martha was cleaning Caleb's room while he was out working. She shouldn't have been in there, but the dust had grown too thick to ignore. Under his bed, she found a trunk. She almost left it alone, but curiosity pulled at her, and the lid wasn't locked. Just a simple clasp. Inside, she found a Confederate uniform. No Union. The blue was faded but unmistakable, and beneath it a piece of metal stamped with numbers and a single word that made her blood run cold. Andersonville. Martha sat back on her heels, the tag trembling in her hands. She'd been 14 years old when she'd volunteered at a field hospital in Pennsylvania. Lied about her age, said she was 18. The surgeons had been desperate enough to believe her. She'd held dying men, assisted in amputations, learned to suture wounds and recognize gangrene, and she'd heard the stories, the whispered horrors from men who'd survived Confederate prison camps. Andersonville had been the worst. She remembered a soldier, 19 years old, dying from dysentery and starvation. He'd weighed maybe 90 pounds, his ribs stark against gray skin. He'd clutched her hand and whispered, "Andersonville, they starved us. I ate my friend's ration after he died. Does that make me a monster?" She'd told him no, told him he'd done what he had to do to survive, held him while he'd cried and then died. And now she knew Caleb Hayes had been there, had survived that hell. The ghost made sense now, the way he always checked for threats, the way he ate quickly like someone might take his food, the whiskey smell late at night when he thought no one noticed. Martha carefully replaced the tag and closed the trunk. When Caleb came home that evening, she didn't mention what she'd found, but she looked at him differently, saw the invisible scars beneath the visible ones. They were both haunted, she realized, both trying to outrun wars that would never quite let them go. That night after supper, they sat on the porch as the sky turned pink and gold. Grace had fallen asleep against Martha's shoulder, exhausted from a day of following Caleb around the ranch. "You know," Caleb said suddenly, "this place hasn't felt like a home in a long time. Not since my mother died. My father and I, we just existed here, worked and ate and slept." He turned to look at her, "But now with you here, it feels alive again." Martha's hands stilled in Grace's hair. "I'm glad I can make it comfortable for you." "It's more than comfortable." His storm cloud eyes were serious and tense. "Martha, I need to be honest with you." Her heart hammered. "About what?" "When I sent for a housekeeper, I thought I just needed someone to cook and clean, someone practical to help manage the house." He paused. "But having you here has made me realize how empty my life was before. You've brought warmth and care to this place. You've made me remember what it's like to look forward to coming home at the end of the day." Martha couldn't breathe. "Caleb, I don't understand what you're saying." He stood and walked to the porch railing, gripping it with both hands. For a long moment he was quiet. Then he turned back to her. "I'm saying this wrong. I'm not good with words." Another pause. "When I look at you, I don't see my housekeeper. I see a woman who's strong and capable and kind. I see someone who makes me want to be better than I am." He took a breath. "And I know I have no right to say any of this because you came here for a job, not for this. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." "Feel what?" Martha whispered. "That I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Martha's mind whirled. Part of her wanted to set Grace aside and throw herself into his arms. Part of her was terrified. This was her employer, the man who controlled her livelihood. If this went wrong, she would have nothing again. Worse than nothing. She'd be a woman with a ruined reputation and a child to feed. But when she looked at his face, she saw vulnerability there, real and raw. This wasn't a man taking advantage of his position. This was a man laying his heart bare and hoping she wouldn't crush it. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I've tried not to, but I do." Relief washed over his features. He crossed the porch in 2 long strides and took her hands in his, careful not to wake Grace. Then I want to say something else, and you can think about it before you answer. You don't have to decide right now. What is it? He took a deep breath. I don't want you to be just the housekeeper. I want you to be the lady of this ranch. My wife. My partner in everything. Martha stared up at him, shocked. I know it's fast, he continued. I know you barely know me, but I'm sure of what I feel, and I'm a man who knows his own mind. I've learned not to wait for what I want. Life's too short. War taught me that. You're proposing, yes, if you'll have me. Her mind raced. This was crazy. She'd known him less than 2 weeks. She should say no, should insist they take more time, should be sensible and practical. But when had her life ever been practical? She'd already crossed a continent on faith. She'd already trusted that this man in this place would be good for her. And she'd been right. I'll have you, she said. Joy broke across his face like sunrise. He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, careful of Grace sleeping between them. He was solid and warm, and she could hear his heart pounding as fast as hers. He rested his chin on top of her head, and they stood that way for a long time, holding each other as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. When he finally pulled back, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, asking permission, then deeper as she responded. Martha had been kissed before, fumbling attempts by boys in Philadelphia, one brutal kiss from her husband on their wedding night. But nothing like this. This was a kiss that promised everything, that sealed a future, that spoke of passion and partnership and forever. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb pressed his forehead to hers. We'll do this right. I'll take you into town tomorrow, and we'll see the preacher. I want everyone to know you're mine. I want everyone to know you're mine too, Martha said, making him laugh. They sat back down on the porch, but this time Caleb pulled her close against his side, his arm around her shoulders. Grace remained asleep, a warm weight against Martha's other side. They talked late into the night, making plans, sharing dreams. He told her about wanting to expand the ranch, about breeding better cattle, about building a legacy. She told him about wanting a real home, about children someday, about growing old, somewhere beautiful. You'll have all of it, he promised. Everything I have is yours. Martha believed him, but neither of them knew that miles away in a mansion in Tucson, a man named Nathaniel Blackwood was reading a telegram that said Caleb Hayes had just brought home a mail-order bride. And Blackwood smiled a smile that had nothing to do with happiness, because he'd been trying to acquire Silver Creek Ranch for 2 years. And he'd just realized the perfect leverage, not the land itself, but the woman and the child. After all, everyone had something they couldn't afford to lose, and Blackwood had made a fortune figuring out exactly what that was. He poured himself a whiskey and began to write a letter to the judge who owed him favors, to the sheriff who was on his payroll, to the banker who knew better than to cross him. Caleb Hayes thought he'd found happiness, but happiness, Blackwood knew, was just another thing that could be taken away, and he was very good at taking things. The next morning, Caleb hitched up the wagon before dawn. Martha woke to the sound of horses outside her window and found him on the porch, clean-shaven for the first time since she'd met him. Without the stubble, she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He looked younger and terrified. Ready? His voice was rough. He'd been up all night, she realized, planning or worrying. Yes. They rode to town in the early light with Grace between them, the child still half asleep. The mountains turned gold, then pink, then blue as the sun climbed. Martha wore her best dress, the one that was still too tight, but Caleb hadn't mentioned her body since that first day, hadn't looked at her with anything but growing warmth. The town was just waking when they arrived, shops opening, women sweeping porches, men heading to work. Caleb drove straight to the church. Reverend Samuel Harris was a kindly man in his 50s who'd known Caleb since birth. He looked up from his morning coffee when they entered, and his eyebrows rose. Well now, he set down his cup. I wondered when you'd come calling, Caleb. This must be the young lady you hired from back east. This is Martha Wright, Caleb said, his hand firm at the small of her back. The warmth of his palm burned through her dress. And I'd like you to marry us. The Reverend's eyebrows climbed higher. That's rather sudden, isn't it? Yes. Caleb's voice was flat, final. But I'm sure. Reverend Harris looked at Martha. And you miss your sure as well. Martha thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The loneliness after her aunt's death. The desperate hope when she'd answered the advertisement. The long journey west. The first moment she'd seen Caleb waiting on the platform and the terror that he'd send her away. The way he'd looked at her on the porch last night. Like she was everything he'd ever wanted. I'm sure, she said firmly. Well then. The Reverend gestured for them to follow. I suppose we should make this official. Let me fetch my wife and the organist. We'll need witnesses. 2 hours later, Martha stood at the altar in her simple dress, holding a bouquet of wildflowers that Mrs. Harris had hastily gathered from her garden. Caleb stood beside her in his Sunday best, his hand warm and steady as it held hers. The Reverend spoke the traditional words. They repeated their vows in voices that barely shook. When Reverend Harris pronounced them man and wife, Caleb kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Mrs. Harris dabbed at her own eyes. Even the Reverend looked moved. They signed in the marriage certificate, Martha carefully writing her new name, Martha Eleanor Hayes. It looked right on the paper. Felt right in her heart. Caleb took her to the general store afterward and insisted on buying her a proper wedding ring. A simple gold band that fit perfectly on her finger. Then he bought supplies for the ranch, introducing her to everyone they met as his wife, his pride evident in every word. Never thought I'd see the day, Tom Garrett's wife Martha said when they ran into her outside the mercantile. She was a small Chinese woman with quick hands and kind eyes. Caleb Hayes married. Your wife is lovely, Caleb. You did well. I know, Caleb said, smiling down at Martha in a way that made her stomach flutter. They ate lunch at the hotel restaurant. A celebration meal of roast beef and potatoes and pie. Caleb held her hand across the table, his thumb stroking her knuckles. Martha felt like she was in a dream. Just yesterday, she'd been his housekeeper. Now she was his wife. The ride back to the ranch seemed shorter. They talked and laughed easier with each other now that everything was settled. When they pulled into the yard, Caleb set the brake and turned to her. I'm going to carry you over the threshold, he announced. That's silly. But Martha was grinning. It's tradition. He jumped down and came around to her side, sweeping her up into his arms before she could protest. She wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her up the porch steps and through the front door. He set her down gently in the main room, but he didn't let her go. Instead, he kissed her again deeper this time, with a hunger that made her knees weak. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I know this was fast, he said quietly, but I don't regret it. Not for a second. Neither do I, Martha said, and meant it with her whole heart. That night, though, Caleb kept his word. He slept in the bunkhouse. Martha lay alone in the big bed, Grace curled beside her and felt strangely bereft, grateful for his respect, confused by her own disappointment. Did he not desire her at all? Or was he simply that much of a gentleman? She didn't know which answer she preferred. The poisoning happened 3 days after the wedding. Martha was making breakfast when Tom Garrett burst through the door, hat in hand, face ashen. Boss, you need to come, now. Caleb was at the table halfway through his coffee. He was up in an instant. What happened? The cattle, south pasture. They're dead. All of them. Martha's stomach dropped. They rode out together, Martha insisting on coming, despite Caleb's protests. What she saw made her nurse's training kick in before her emotional reaction could. 120 cattle lay in the grass, not scattered like they died of disease, grouped near the water trough, foam around their mouths, eyes glazed. Poison, she said quietly. Caleb knelt beside the nearest cow, his hands shaking. $3,000. My entire savings. Gone. Tom was already examining the water trough. Boss, look. They gathered around. The water had an oily sheen, a bitter smell Martha recognized from her hospital days. Arsenic. Who did this? Caleb's voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that came before violence. Only one man wants you gone bad enough, Tom said. Blackwood. The sheriff came, examined the evidence, shook his head with what might have been genuine regret or practiced sympathy. Martha couldn't tell. Can't prove who did it, Hayes. Water could have been poisoned by anyone. You got enemies. One. Caleb's jaw was tight. Blackwood's in Tucson. Got witnesses. Was at a meeting with the territorial governor all last night. The sheriff tucked his notepad away. I'll file a report, but without evidence. After he left, Caleb stood staring at the dead cattle for a long time. Martha touched his arm. Caleb, I can't replace them. His voice was hollow. That was everything. I was going to use that money to expand the herd, buy breeding stock. Now I can't even pay the hands through winter. We'll figure something out. He looked at her then, and she saw the war survivor beneath the rancher, the man who'd learned that everything could be taken away in an instant. You should leave, he said, while you still can. This is going to get worse. No. Martha, you don't understand what Blackwood is. He's not going to stop until he has this ranch, and he doesn't care who gets hurt. She stepped closer, close enough to smell the leather and wood smoke scent of him, mixed with sweat and fear. Then we fight. Together. You didn't sign up for this. I signed up for you, for better or worse. Remember, she touched her wedding ring. That was 3 days ago. I'm not running. Something in his eyes shifted. Gratitude. And something deeper. Something that looked like love taking root. A week later, Caleb went to the bank. Martha waited in the wagon with Grace watching through the window as he spoke with the manager. She saw the manager's face go from professional to uncomfortable. Saw Caleb's shoulders tighten. When he came out, his expression told her everything. They denied the loan, she said. Blackwood owns 40% of the bank. Caleb's hands gripped the reins so hard his knuckles went white. The manager said he'd been advised not to approve any loans to Silver Creek Ranch. Can he do that? He just did. Caleb clicked his tongue, starting the horses. And there's no other bank within 100 miles. No way to get capital. No way to restock the herd. They rode in silence for a mile. Then Martha said, what about horses? What? You said you have a dozen horses. Can't build a ranch on horses, but you can break them. Sell them. The army needs mounts. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. That's actually smart. I'm not just a pretty face. She tried to make it a joke, but it came out defensive. No, hon. His voice was serious. You're much more valuable than that. Something warm bloomed in Martha's chest. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked together breaking horses. Caleb taught her to ride his hands, steadying her in the saddle, his voice patient when she wobbled. Martha proved surprisingly good with the animals. She had gentle hands, a calm voice. The horses responded to her in ways they didn't with the rougher hands. You're a natural, Caleb said one evening, watching her brush down a particularly skittish mare. I like them. They don't judge. They just are. He came to stand beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. The contact sent electricity through her skin. Martha, his voice was low, about the sleeping arrangements. Her heart hammered. Yes. I don't want you to think I don't, that I'm not. He struggled for words. You're my wife. I want to be a real husband to you, but I won't rush you, won't pressure you. She turned to face him. What if I want to be rushed? Heat flared in his eyes, but he said, give it time. We barely know each other. We're married. In name. He touched her cheek. I want it to be more than that. But more than that takes trust. And trust takes time. Martha wanted to argue, but she also knew he was right. So she just nodded. That night, though, she lay awake for hours, thinking about the way he'd touched her cheek, the heat in his eyes, the restraint in his voice, wondering how much longer they could keep pretending. Grace was the one who broke the ice between them. The child had taken to following Caleb everywhere, mimicking his walk, his gestures, his speech patterns. Caleb, in turn, treated her with a gentleness that made Martha's throat tight. He made Grace a small rope and taught her to lasso fence posts, let her sit on his horse, her club foot not mattering when she was up high, carried her on his shoulders when her foot hurt too much to walk, and Grace started calling him Papa. The first time it happened, Caleb stopped mid-step, turned to look at Martha, a question in his eyes. She nodded, crying. Say it again, Caleb said to Grace, his voice rough. Papa, Papa, look, I did it. Grace had successfully lassoed a fence post. Caleb scooped her up, swung her around, laughing. You did. You're going to be the best cowgirl in Arizona. Martha watched from the porch, tears streaming down her face. Her daughter had never had a father. Thomas Wright had died before Grace could talk, but now she did. That evening, after Grace was asleep, Martha found Caleb on the porch, their usual spot. But instead of sitting in separate chairs, she sat beside him on the steps, close enough that their thighs touched. "Thank you," she said, "for what? For being good to her, for not caring about her foot." "Why would I care?" Caleb sounded genuinely confused. "She's perfect. Most people pity her, or worse, they think she's being punished for something. My sins, maybe. People are idiots." He put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. "Grace is smart and brave and kind. Her foot is just a foot." Martha leaned into him, breathing in his scent. "You're a good man, Caleb Hayes. I'm trying to be for both of you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear. Martha felt something shift between them. Not just attraction, partnership, family. She was falling in love with her husband. The rattlesnake crisis came on a hot afternoon in early June. Martha was hanging laundry when she heard Grace's delighted laugh. She looked up to see her daughter chasing a butterfly toward the creek. Then she saw it, coiled in the grass 10 feet from Grace, brown and tan, nearly invisible against the dirt, the distinctive rattle already buzzing. Martha's body moved before her mind caught up. She dropped the wet sheet and ran, yanking the pistol from her apron pocket. The small Derringer she'd carried since Montana, since the night a drunk miner had tried to force his way into her room. Grace was 15 yards away. The snake was closer. No time to reach her daughter. No time to shout a warning that might startle the child into the snake's strike range. Martha raised the gun, sighted down the barrel, exhaled, fired. The snake's head exploded. The body thrashed once, twice, then went still. Grace stopped, turning at the sound. "Mama!" Then Caleb was running from the barn, Tom and 2 other hands behind him, all of them with guns drawn. "What happened?" Caleb's eyes scanned for threats. Martha's hand was shaking now, the Derringer smoking. "Snake. Grace. I just—" Caleb saw the dead rattlesnake, saw the distance. His eyes widened. "That's a 60-foot shot." Tom walked over, examined the snake. "Clean headshot. Hell of a aim, ma'am." Martha couldn't speak. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaking. She'd almost lost Grace. Almost watched her daughter die from a snake bite miles from a doctor with no antivenom. Caleb holstered his gun and walked to her, gently took the Derringer from her trembling hand. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My husband taught me." The lie came automatically. "Your husband was either the best marksman in Montana or you're lying." Caleb's voice was gentle. Not accusing, just curious. Martha looked at Grace, who was now examining the dead snake with morbid fascination. Tom was keeping her back from the body. "Does it matter?" Martha whispered. "Grace is safe." "No, it doesn't matter." Caleb touched her shoulder. "But Martha, you can tell me things. I won't judge. I promise you that." She wanted to tell him, wanted to unburden herself of all the secrets. The war, the field hospitals, the things she'd seen and done, but fear held her tongue. What if he thought her unnatural? What if he realized his wife was damaged, so she just nodded? But the door between them cracked open a little wider. The injury happened a week later. Caleb was breaking a wild stallion, a beautiful buckskin that had been running free in the hills. The horse was green, unpredictable. Tom had advised waiting, getting more help. But Caleb was stubborn, and maybe Martha thought later a little reckless, trying to prove something to himself. She was in the garden when she heard the shouts, dropped her hoe and ran. The scene hit her in flashes, Caleb on the ground, blood pooling beneath his head, the stallion dancing nervously nearby, eyes rolling white, Tom and the hands surrounding Caleb's prone form. Martha's training took over. She shoved through the men, dropped to her knees beside Caleb. He was unconscious, a deep gash across his scalp, bleeding heavily. Head wounds always bled heavily, she knew, but this one was bad. "We got a ride for the doc in town." One of the hands was panicking. "Hour there, hour back." 2 hours. Caleb could bleed out in 2 hours. Or worse, if there was a skull fracture, brain swelling, could kill him. Martha made a decision. "No," her voice came out with a command she hadn't used since the war. "Put him on the table in the house. Boil water. I need clean cloth, whiskey, and a sewing needle. Now." The hands stared at her. "Move." She barked it like a field surgeon. They moved. Tom and another hand carried Caleb to the house. Martha ran ahead, clearing the kitchen table. Her hands were steady now, muscle memory taking over. Grace appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. Mama, bring me my bag, the brown leather one under my bed, quickly. Grace ran. Martha examined the wound with professional detachment. Scalp laceration approximately 4 inches long. Deep but clean. She palpated the skull beneath. No depression, no give. Probably no fracture. Pupils equal when she lifted his eyelids. Good sign. Grace returned with the medical bag Martha had hidden since arriving. The one she'd told herself she'd never need again. She opened it. Scalpel, forceps, sutures, carbolic acid, all the tools of her trade. The hands crowded around watching. Martha looked up. Tom, hold his head still. Jose, I need you to hand me things when I ask. The rest of you get out. You're blocking the light. They obeyed without question. Martha cleaned the wound with carbolic acid, the sharp smell filling the kitchen. She shaved around the laceration with steady hands. Examined the damage. 20 stitches, she said aloud. Maybe 25. Tom stared at her. How do you know that? Because I've done this 200 times. She threaded the needle, began to suture. The world narrowed to the wound, the needle, the thread. Her hands remembered the motions. Over, under, pull through. Knot, next stitch. She'd been 14 years old when an army surgeon had taught her, his hands guiding hers as they closed a soldier's belly wound. Don't hesitate. Hesitation kills. You have the hands for this, girl. 20 minutes later, she tied off the final suture, bandaged the wound with clean cloth. Concussion likely, she said, washing her hands in a basin Jose had brought. We watch for confusion, vomiting, unequal pupils. If any of those happen, we send for the doctor. But he should be fine. Should. Tom's voice was tight. Medicine isn't an exact science, Mr. Garrett. But I've seen worse. Much worse. And I've seen men survive. He's strong. He'll awake in a few hours. How do you know all this? Jose whispered in accented English. Martha looked at the young Mexican hand, barely 20 years old, the same age as the soldiers she'd sewn up. I was a Civil War nurse, she said quietly, from 1862 to 1865. I started when I was 12 years old. Lied about my age. The surgeons needed help. I learned. Silence in the kitchen. Then Tom said, you were 12. Children grew up fast in the war. You should know that, Mr. Garrett. You're old enough to remember. I remember. Tom looked at her with new eyes, respect, maybe a little awe. I just never heard of a girl that young in the hospitals. There were more of us than you'd think. We just didn't talk about it after. Martha dried her hands. Grace, come help me watch him. We need to monitor his breathing. She sat vigil beside Caleb for hours. Grace curled in her lap, dozing. Martha's hand on Caleb's chest, feeling it rise and fall. Steady, strong. When his eyes finally fluttered open near dusk, the first word out of his mouth was, Martha. I'm here. Relief flooded through her. What happened? You hit your head. I stitched you up. He reached up, felt the bandage, winced. Yes. How, Martha took a breath. I was a nurse in the war. Caleb struggled to sit up. She helped him, propping pillows behind his back. How old are you? He asked. 26. The war ended 11 years ago. You would have been 15 when it ended, 12 when I started. She met his eyes. I lied about my age. They needed help. I had steady hands. Caleb stared at her. You were a child. Children grew up fast in the war. You know that. You were there. Something passed between them. Shared understanding. They were both war survivors, both carrying invisible scars. What else don't I know about you, Martha Wright Hayes? She managed a small smile. I guess we both have secrets. I guess we do. He reached for her hand, held it, and Martha felt the walls between them crumble just a little more. That evening, after Grace was asleep and Caleb was resting, Tom Garrett returned to the house. He had a worried expression that made Martha's stomach clench. What is it? Found something in the south pasture today. Was checking where the poisoning happened. He led her outside away from the house. In the moonlight, he showed her a hole. Someone had dug down about 3 feet and hit rock. But not just any rock. The exposed vein glittered even in starlight. What is that? Martha breathed. Silver, ma'am, there's a whole vein of it under your ranch. Martha's mind raced. Silver, worth a fortune. Enough to save the ranch 10 times over. Enough to kill for. Does Blackwood know? I'd bet my life on it. Tom's voice was grim. This is why he wants the land. Not for cattle. For this. We need to tell Caleb. Tomorrow. Let him rest tonight. But Mrs. Hayes, this changes everything. Blackwood's not going to stop now. Not when there's this much money at stake. That night, Martha couldn't sleep. She lay beside Grace thinking about silver and blood and the war she thought she'd left behind. Thinking about how history repeats, how greed makes monsters of men, how the things worth killing for are often buried beneath the surface. The next morning, Caleb insisted on getting out of bed despite Martha's protests. She showed him the silver vein. He stood staring at it for a mighty time. How much do you think? He finally asked Tom. Could be hundreds of thousands, maybe more. We'd need a surveyor to know for sure. Blackwood knows, Caleb said. It wasn't a question. He's got to. He's too smart not to have surveyed before making offers. Caleb looked at Martha. This is what he wants, not the ranch, the silver. Then we need help, the law. The law here is in Blackwood's pocket. Caleb's voice was bitter. The sheriff, the judge, half the territorial government. Not all law. Martha took his hand. I wrote to the U.S. Marshal in Tucson 2 weeks ago, documented everything Blackwood's done. The threats, the poisoning, everything. Caleb stared at her. You did what? I'm not just a pretty face. She said it again, and this time it came out strong. Certain. Caleb laughed, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was different from their first kiss. Not gentle, not tentative. This was desperate, grateful, hungry. His hands in her hair, her fingers clutching his shirt. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he said, You're incredible. I'm practical. You're both. He kissed her again deeper. Tom cleared his throat. I'll just go check on the horses. After he left, Caleb pulled back, looked at Martha with intensity that made her knees weak. I love you, he said. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I love you. Martha's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. Then let's do this right. He took both her hands. Tonight, no more sleeping in the bunkhouse. You're my wife. I want to be your husband, in every way. Heat flooded through her. Yes. That night, Martha tucked Grace into bed in the small room they'd set up for her. The child was growing more independent, excited about having her own space. Then Martha went to the room she'd been sharing with no one and found Caleb waiting. He'd bathed, shaved, changed into clean clothes. The bandage on his head was the only sign of injury. Martha, his voice was rough, if you're not ready. She crossed to him, put her fingers on his lips. I'm ready. What happened next was tender and awkward and perfect. Caleb was gentle with her body, calling her beautiful, even as she tried to hide beneath sheets. His touch erased the memory of her first husband's brutality, replaced it with care. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Martha's head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. I need to tell you something, he said quietly, about Charlotte, my first wife. Martha went still. I loved her, but I was never really present with her. I was always working and always trying to prove something. And when she got sick, I was away buying cattle. She died alone. His voice cracked. I've been terrified that if I let myself love you, really love you, God will punish me again. That I'll lose you like I lost her. Martha lifted her head to look at him. You won't lose me. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll fight. I'm not fragile, Caleb. I'm not going to break. She touched his scarred hand. We're both survivors. We know how to fight. I'm scared, he admitted. Terrified, actually. It was Martha's turn to be brave, to share her own fear. I'm scared too, she whispered. I'm not the woman you think I am, Caleb. I've touched more dead men than living ones. I've held soldiers while they screamed for mothers who'd never come. I've cut off limbs, seen things that still wake me up at night. She showed him her forearms, the rope-burn scars she usually kept hidden, from restraining patients during amputations. I was 12 years old holding down a screaming man while the surgeons sawed off his leg. Tears streamed down her face. What kind of woman does that make me? Caleb took her scarred arms and kissed them. Each mark, each reminder. The kind I want to spend my life with, he said fiercely. The kind who saves lives. The kind who's strong enough to do what needs doing. They held each other in the darkness, two broken people finding wholeness together. But happiness, as Nathaniel Blackwood knew, was just another thing that could be taken away. The next Sunday, they went to church in town. Martha usually sat with the other women while Caleb sat with the men. But this week, when she approached her usual pew, the women turned away. Whispers followed her, loud enough to hear. Did you hear she was a camp follower in the war? No decent woman does what she did, touching men like that. 26 years old and already widowed once. Wonder what happened to the first husband. Martha's face burned. She understood immediately. Blackwood had spread lies, twisted her nursing service into something sordid. Even the preacher was cold. Mrs. Hayes, perhaps you should sit in back. Martha stood frozen, humiliated. Grace clutched her hands, sensing something wrong. Then Caleb was there. He crossed the church in long strides, took Martha's arm. My wife sits with me. His voice carried to every corner. Anyone who has a problem with her has a problem with me. Silence. The men respected Caleb, feared him a little too since the war. He led her to his pew, sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, daring anyone to comment. After the service, most people avoided them. But one old woman approached. Mrs. Chen Tom's wife. Your husband is a good man, she said quietly. Don't let bastards like Blackwood break you. Thank you, Martha managed. On the ride home, she couldn't hold back tears. I'm sorry, Caleb said. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. If I just sold when he first offered. No, Martha wiped her eyes. This is Blackwood's fault. Not yours, not mine. His. But the damage was done, and both of them knew it would get worse. That night, the barn burned. They woke to Tom pounding on the door, shouting about fire. Caleb and the hands fought the flames for hours while Martha and Grace brought water. They saved the horses, but the barn was destroyed, along with the winter hay, 2 saddles, thousands of dollars in equipment. In the ashes, they found coal oil cans. Deliberate arson. He's escalating, Tom said quietly. Caleb's jaw was tight. I know. They doubled the watch, slept in shifts, waited for the next attack. It came a week later. Blackwood himself rode up to the ranch with 8 armed men. Caleb met him in the yard, rifle in hand. Martha watched from the porch, Grace behind her. Hayes. Blackwood was a tall man in his 50s, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit despite the Arizona heat. Last chance, $15,000 for the ranch, triple my first offer. And if I refuse, Blackwood smiled, then I take it, one way or another. Martha stepped forward. We're not selling. Blackwood's eyes moved to her, cold, assessing, like she was livestock. Mrs. Hayes, talk sense to your husband. This doesn't end well for you. We're not selling, Martha repeated. Blackwood walked toward the porch. Caleb moved to intercept, but 2 of Blackwood's men blocked him. Blackwood climbed the steps, stood too close to Martha. Brave words from a woman who should know her place. Then he slapped her. The crack echoed across the yard. Martha's head snapped to the side. Grace screamed. Caleb roared and attacked. He tackled Blackwood, got in 2 solid punches before Blackwood's men pulled him off. They beat him to the ground, boots and fists. Martha screamed, tried to intervene. One of the men shoved her back. She fell, hitting the porch rail hard. Enough! Blackwood stood, wiping blood from his split lip. Let him live, for now. He looked down at Caleb, who was barely conscious on the ground. You have until Friday. Sign the deed or I take the girl. Martha's blood went cold. Touch her and I'll kill you myself. Blackwood laughed. A fat old nurse, I'm terrified. He rode away. Martha dragged Caleb inside, examined his injuries with shaking hands. Broken ribs, black eye, split lip, possible concussion. She worked through the night binding his ribs, stitching cuts. Grace helped bringing supplies without being asked. Near dawn, Caleb woke. His eyes found Martha immediately. Are you hurt? I'm fine. A lie, her cheek was swollen, her back screaming where she'd hit the rail. Martha. He tried to sit up, gasped at the pain. I can't lose you. Can't lose another one. I'm terrified. If I let myself love you, God will punish me again. I'll wake up and you'll be cold in my arms like Charlotte was. Caleb, Martha took his hand. Are you saying you love me? I tried not to, but you're everything. And I'm going to fail you like I failed her. You didn't fail Charlotte, and you're not failing me. You're here fighting for us. I'm scared, he admitted. So scared. I'm scared too. Martha's voice broke. I'm not the woman you think I am, Caleb. I'm broken. I have nightmares. I wake up smelling blood even though my hands are clean. What if I'm too damaged to be a real wife? Caleb pulled her down beside him, despite the pain. Kissed her scarred hands. You're not damaged. You're a survivor. And I love you more than I've ever loved anything. I love you too. They held each other as the sun rose, two wounded people trying to heal together. But there was no time for healing. The next day, Caleb laid out the plan. We send Grace somewhere safe. Mrs. Chen will hide her in the old miner's cabin in the hills. Then we meet Blackwood's deadline. Pretend to negotiate. Stall until the marshal responds to your letter. And if the marshal doesn't come in time, Caleb's eyes were hard, then we fight. The goodbye with Grace broke Martha's heart. Mama, don't leave me. Grace clung to her. I'm not leaving, baby. You're going on an adventure. Mrs. Chen will take care of you. Will you come get me? I promise. Caleb knelt beside them. Grace, I need you to be brave. Can you do that for me? Grace sniffled. Will you be my real papa when I come back? I'm your real papa now, forever. They watched Mrs. Chen's wagon disappear into the hills. Martha stood in the yard crying. Caleb held her. She's safe, he said. That's what matters. But that night a note arrived, slipped under the door while they slept. Martha found it at dawn. She read it again. Her hands started shaking so badly the paper fluttered. Caleb, her voice came out strangled. Caleb, he appeared half-dressed, alarmed. What? She handed him the note. He read it. His face went white. The note said, we have the girl, Devil's Canyon, midnight Friday. Bring the deed or she dees. Come alone or she days. Tell anyone and she dees. Below the words was a lock of blonde hair tied with a Grace's blue ribbon. Martha's knees gave out. Caleb caught her. No, she whispered. No, no, no. We'll get her back. Caleb's voice was steel. I swear to God we'll get her back. He has her. He has my baby. And we're going to take her back. Martha looked up at him, saw the warrior beneath the rancher, the soldier who'd survived Andersonville, the man who would burn the world down for his family. What do? We go to Devil's Canyon, but not alone, and not unarmed, did. He helped her stand. You said you can shoot. How good are you, really? Civil War field hospitals were in war zones. I learned to shoot to protect medical supplies from deserters and scavengers. She met his eyes. I'm very good. Good, because we're going to need it. They had 2 days to prepare, 2 days to plan, 2 days to get ready for war, because Nathaniel Blackwood had just made a fatal mistake. He'd threatened Martha Hayes's child, and Martha had learned in the war that mothers were the most dangerous creatures alive when their babies were at risk. She'd held dying soldiers, amputated limbs, stood in rivers of blood, and she'd do it all again to save Grace. Blackwood thought he was fighting a rancher and a fat old nurse. He had no idea what was coming for him. They rode out at dusk on Friday, 2 hours before the midnight deadline. Caleb, Martha, Tom, Garrett, and 3 ranch hands. All armed, all silent. Martha wore split riding skirts. She'd sewn herself practical for what was coming. Her Sharps rifle across her saddle, Caleb's Derringer in her boot, her medical bag strapped behind her. Because she knew with the certainty born from war that someone would bleed tonight. She just prayed it wouldn't be Grace. Caleb had tried one last time to make her stay behind. She'd silenced him with a look that reminded him who'd shot the rattlesnake, who'd survived field hospitals, who'd crossed a continent alone with a crippled child in $17. I'm not waiting, she'd said. That's my daughter. Now they climbed into the mountains as stars appeared overhead. Devil's Canyon was a box canyon, steep walls on 3 sides, 1 narrow entrance. Perfect for an ambush, which was exactly what Blackwood wanted. But Caleb had a plan. Tom, you and the men circle around the ridge. Get above them. Martha, you take position on the north wall with your rifle. That's about 300 yards. Can you make that shot? Yes. When it starts, you aim for anyone threatening Grace. Don't hesitate. Don't think, just shoot. Martha nodded. She'd learned not to hesitate when she was 12 years old, holding a scalpel over a soldier's infected leg. I'll ride in with the fake deed, Caleb continued. Soon as I see Grace is alive, I'll signal. That's when everyone moves. And if they shoot you on sight, Tom asked, then Martha shoots them. They separated at the canyon mouth. Martha climbed the north wall, finding a position behind rocks. From here, she could see the entire canyon floor below Silver in the moonlight. She settled in, checked her rifle, waited. War had taught her patience, had taught her to quiet her breathing slow, her heartbeat become nothing but eyes and hands and purpose. At 11:45, she heard horses. Blackwood rode in with 12 men, more than expected. They spread out across the canyon, rifles ready, and in the center, tied to a horse, was Grace. Even from 300 yards, Martha could see her daughter was terrified. Hands bound, face tear-streaked, but alive. Thank God, alive. At midnight exactly, Caleb rode in alone. Hayes, Blackwood's voice carried in the still air. Where are your men? Home, like you said. I came alone. Did you bring the deed? Caleb held up a paper. Right here, let me see my daughter first. Blackwood gestured. One of his men led Grace's horse forward. Papa. Grace's voice broke Martha's heart. I'm here, sweetheart. It's going to be okay. Blackwood smiled. Touching. Now hand over the deed. Let her go first. I don't think so. Blackwood drew his revolver, pointed it at Grace's small head. Deed first, or I put a bullet in her leg. Won't kill her, just hurt. A lot. Martha's finger moved to the trigger. 300 yards. Wind from the west, maybe 5 miles per hour. Adjust sight picture. Breathe, but she couldn't risk it. Not with a gun at Grace's head. Caleb started to reach for the deed. Then everything went wrong. One of Blackwood's men spotted Tom on the ridge. Boss, we got company. Blackwood spun, and in that instant of distraction, Caleb drew. He shot the man holding Grace's horse. The man fell. The horse bolted, Grace screaming. Chaos erupted. Martha didn't think. Her hands moved with muscle memory from a different war, a different canyon, a different life that suddenly felt like yesterday. She fired. 300 yards. The bullet took the man, aiming at Caleb through the shoulder. He went down. Chamber another round. Fire. Another man fell. Below, Caleb was fighting hand-to-hand with 2 of Blackwood's men. Tom and the ranch hands had opened fire from the ridge. Bullets sang through the air like angry hornets. But Grace. Where was Grace? Martha scanned desperately, found her. The spooked horse had carried her 50 yards and stopped. Grace was still tied to the saddle, crying, trying to get free. And one of Blackwood's men was riding toward her. Martha swung the rifle, led the target, breathed out, fired. The man tumbled from his saddle, but now they'd pinpointed her position. 3 men turned their rifles toward the north wall. Bullets sparked off the rocks around her. Martha flattened, rolled, came up behind a different boulder. Fired again. She was 12 years old again, watching soldiers die. 14 holding instruments while surgeons sawed through bone. 26 doing the only thing that mattered, protecting her child. She'd killed 2 men now. Would kill a dozen more if it meant Grace lived. Below, Caleb had fought free. He was running toward Grace, but Blackwood stepped into his path. The 2 men faced each other, both armed, both ready to kill. Should have taken my offer, Hayes. Blackwood raised his gun. Martha's rifle barrel found him. But Grace was behind Blackwood, tied to a horse directly in the line of fire. If Martha missed, if the bullet went through, she couldn't risk it. Caleb and Blackwood fired simultaneously. Caleb's shot went wide. Blackwood's didn't. Caleb went down. No! Martha's scream echoed off the canyon walls. Blackwood turned toward Grace, gun raised. Your father just died for nothing, girl. But don't worry. I'll make sure you join him soon. Martha stood, fully exposed on the canyon wall. Every gun could turn on her now, but she only had eyes for Blackwood. Hey, she shouted. Blackwood! He turned. Martha fired. The bullet hit his gun hand. The revolver flew into the darkness. Blackwood screamed, clutching his shattered hand. Then Tom was there, rifle pressed to Blackwood's head. Don't move. But Martha was already sliding down the canyon wall, loose rock cascading around her. She hit the bottom hard, ignored the pain in her ankle, ran. Caleb was on the ground, blood spreading across his chest. Grace was crying, still tied. The remaining hired guns were either dead, wounded, or fleeing. Martha reached Caleb first. Martha. His voice was wet, bubbling, lung shot. Don't talk. Save your strength. She ripped open his shirt. Entry wound left side 3 inches below collarbone. She rolled him gently. Exit wound in back. Through and through, missing the heart but clipping the lung. He was drowning in his own blood. Grace, Caleb gasped. Get Grace. Tom, cut her free. Martha was already working hands steady despite her terror. She packed the wound front and back with cloth torn from her skirt. Applied pressure. Martha. Caleb's hand found hers. I love you. Don't you dare say goodbye. Tears streamed down her face. Don't you dare. I didn't cross a continent to lose you now. Grace was suddenly there, freed from the horse, throwing herself at Caleb. Papa. Papa, don't die. Won't, Caleb managed. Your mama won't let me. You're damn right I won't. Martha's voice was fierce. Grace, my bag, the brown one. Bring it here. Run. The child ran. Martha examined the wound more carefully. The bleeding was slowing with pressure, but he needed surgery, needed to drain blood from the lung cavity, needed equipment she didn't have. But she'd performed surgery in tents during thunderstorms, with candles for light and screaming all around. She could do this. Grace returned with the medical bag. Martha pulled out her instruments. Tom, I need you to hold him down. He's going to fight me. Ma'am, I have to drain his lung without anesthetic. It's going to hurt, a lot. Tom paled but nodded. He in another hand held Caleb's shoulders. Martha found her scalpel. Caleb, look at me. Look at my eyes. His storm cloud gaze locked on hers. This is going to hurt, but I need you to stay still. Can you do that for me? Yes. I love you, remember that. Then she cut. Caleb screamed. The sound echoed off canyon walls, but he didn't move, didn't fight the hands holding him. Martha worked with precision born from 200 similar procedures, found the intercostal space, made a small incision, inserted a hollowed reed she'd brought for exactly this purpose. Blood and air bubbled out. Caleb gasped, coughed, breathed. The drowning stopped. There. Martha's hands were shaking now. You're going to be okay. You are going to live. Told you, Caleb whispered. You won't let me die. Then the sound of horses. Many horses. Everyone tensed, reaching for weapons. But the voice that called out made Martha sob with relief. U.S. Marshal, lower your weapons. A man in a star badge rode into the canyon with 10 deputies. He took in the scene of bodies, scattered Blackwood clutching his ruined hand, Caleb bleeding on the ground with Martha bent over him. Mrs. Hayes, yes, Martha didn't look up from bandaging Caleb. You got my letter. 3 weeks ago, been gathering evidence since, witnesses willing to testify against Blackwood. Figured I'd arrive to find you dead or him victorious. The marshal dismounted. Glad I was wrong. He walked to Blackwood, who was still held at gunpoint by Tom. Nathaniel Blackwood, I have a warrant for your arrest. Murder, arson, fraud, attempted murder, kidnapping. The marshal pulled out handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt you will. Blackwood looked at Martha with pure hatred. You did this. I documented everything. Every threat, every crime. Sent it to the marshal with dates, times, witnesses. Martha met his eyes. I told you, touch my daughter and I'd kill you. But I decided to let the law do it instead. The silver, Blackwood spat blood. It's worth millions. And it's mine, Caleb said weakly. Every ounce. The marshal's deputies were collecting the bodies. 5 of Blackwood's men dead, 3 wounded. 2 had fled into the night. But Martha's attention was drawn to Jose, the young Mexican hand who'd helped her during Caleb's first injury. He was lying near the canyon wall, clutching his stomach. No. Martha grabbed her bag, ran to him. Bullet to the abdomen, the worst kind of wound. She'd seen hundreds of men die from stomach wounds in the war. Jose, stay with me. Senora. His voice was faint. It hurts. I know, honey, I know. She examined the wound. The bullet had gone through his stomach, maybe his liver. Internal bleeding she couldn't stop, couldn't fix. Not here, not with the tools she had. She held pressure anyway, tried everything she knew, but she'd been a nurse long enough to know death when she saw it approaching. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, I can't. You tried. Jose's hand found hers. His fingers were cold. Gracias, señora, for trying. He died holding her hand. Martha sat back, blood covering her arms to the elbows. Two men dead by her bullets. One died despite her best efforts. The cost of victory written in blood on stone. Grace crept close, wrapped arms around her mother. Mama, is he? Yes, baby, he's gone. You couldn't save him. Martha pulled Grace into her lap, heedless of the blood. Tears streamed down her face. Tears for Jose, for the war, for every person she'd tried to save and lost. No, sometimes we can't save everyone. Sometimes we just have to try and keep trying and hope it's enough. But you saved Papa. Yes, I saved Papa. And you saved me. Grace looked up at her mother's tear-stained face, troubled. Mama, why do you cry? Mr. Caleb said you are the bravest person he knows. Brave people don't cry, Mo. Martha held her daughter closer, her voice breaking. Brave people cry the most, baby, because they feel everything and keep going anyway. Grace was quiet for a moment, then whispered, Are you brave, Mama? I'm trying to be, for you. Martha held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair. Lavender soap, life, future. I'll always save you, baby. Always. They made camp in the canyon that night, too dangerous to move Caleb. The marshal's deputies stood guard while Martha worked through the hours of darkness, monitoring Caleb's breathing, checking for signs of infection, keeping him alive through sheer force of will. Grace slept curled against her mother. Tom and the remaining hands took turns keeping watch. And Nathaniel Blackwood sat in chains guarded by two deputies watching the woman he'd underestimated destroy everything he'd built. Near dawn he spoke. You were just supposed to be a housekeeper. Martha looked up from changing Caleb's bandages. I was never just anything. If you'd been beautiful, I might have offered to buy you too, along with the ranch. If I'd been beautiful, Caleb would have married me for my face. But I was fat, so he married me for my hands. She held up her scarred, bloody hands, and my hands saved his life tonight. Beauty fades, skill endures. The silver will make you rich. I don't care about the silver. I care about my family. Blackwood laughed bitter. Family. I had a son once. Hayes testified against him. Got him hanged for horse theft. Your son was a thief and a murderer. The testimony was true. He was my blood. Blood doesn't excuse evil. Martha's voice was cold. You tried to take my daughter, my husband, my home. You failed. And now you'll hang just like your son did. At least I'll die knowing I nearly won. Nearly isn't enough. You lost. And you lost to a fat mail-order bride who knew how to write a letter and shoot a gun. I hope that thought keeps you warm in your cell. She turned back to Caleb, dismissing Blackwood like the irrelevant thing he'd become. They transported Caleb back to the ranch the next day on a makeshift stretcher. Martha rode beside him, monitoring his every breath. He was stable but weak. The lung was healing, but infection was always a risk. Grace rode with Tom, chattering about how brave her mama was, how she'd shot bad men, how she'd saved Papa. Tom just nodded, looking at Martha with something like awe. When they reached Silver Creek Ranch, the entire community was waiting. Word had spread about the confrontation, about Martha's marksmanship, about the U.S. Marshal's arrest of Blackwood, and about the silver. Over the next weeks, as Caleb recovered, three things happened. First, Blackwood went to trial in Prescott. The evidence Martha had documented, combined with testimony from three ranchers he'd driven off their land and two witnesses to murder, was overwhelming. He was convicted on all counts, sentenced to hang. Martha didn't attend the execution, but she read about it in the newspaper. Felt nothing except relief that the threat was gone. Second, a mining company offered $50,000 for the mineral rights to the silver vein. Caleb, still recovering, asked Martha what she thought. It's your decision too, your co-owner. Martha looked around the ranch, at Grace playing with the chickens, at the rebuilt barn, at the mountains turning gold in the sunset. We don't need to mine it ourselves. That much money. We could expand the ranch, hire more hands, and I could, what? The town needs a doctor. I could open a practice, train other women, use what I learned in the war for something good. Caleb smiled. My wife, the doctor. If you don't mind. Mind, I'm proud. They sold the mineral rights, used 10,000 to build a medical practice in town. The rest they invested in the ranch and in the future. Third, Martha's reputation transformed overnight. The women who'd shunned her at church now came to her clinic with ailments. At first hesitant, then grateful, then admiring. She'd saved Caleb Hayes' life in a canyon, shot 2 men to protect her family, documented evidence that took down the territory's most powerful criminal. She wasn't a camp follower. She was a war hero, a pioneer, a woman who'd done what needed doing. The preacher who'd told her to sit back now asked her to speak at Sunday service about courage and faith. She declined politely. She had patience to see. 6 months after Devil's Canyon, on a warm spring evening, they held a second wedding. Not because they needed to. They were already married, already partners, already in love. But because Caleb wanted to do it right this time. The whole town came. The church was packed. Flowers covered every surface, donated by grateful patients. The organist played. Grace was flower girl, walking without her usual limp. Martha had performed surgery on her club foot 3 months prior, using techniques she'd taught herself from medical text. The child still had a slight turn, but she could walk, could run, could dance, and she was radiant in her white dress throwing petals. Martha wore a new dress, still modest, still not quite fitting right, but Caleb had chosen it, had insisted on buying it from the finest dressmaker in Tucson. You're beautiful, he'd said when she'd protested. I'm fat. You're strong, you're brave, you're mine, that's all that matters. Now he stood at the altar, fully recovered except for a scar on his chest that matched Martha's scars on her arms. Battle wounds, proof of survival. Reverend Harris spoke about partnership, about love forged in fire, about 2 people who'd found each other against all odds. When it came time for vows, Caleb spoke first. Martha, when I sent for a housekeeper, I thought I was buying help. But I got so much more. I got a partner, a warrior, the love of my life. I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you, to value your mind as much as your heart, to be worthy of the gift you've given me. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the same gold band from their first wedding, but polished now, engraved inside with the date and the words, forever and always. Martha's turn. Caleb, I came here expecting to scrub floors and cook meals, but you saw me. Really saw me, not my body or my past or my shame. You saw my strength, my skill, my heart, and you chose me. Her voice caught. I promise to choose you every day, to fight beside you, to build with you, to love you even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They kissed as husband and wife for the second time, but this kiss was different. Not tentative, not desperate, just right. The reception was at the ranch, tables laden with food, music and dancing, laughter. Grace danced with Caleb, her small feet on top of his boots as he swayed. Papa, will you love Mama forever? Forever and always, sweetheart. Even when she's old and wrinkly, Caleb laughed, especially then. Martha watched from the porch, tears of joy streaming down her face. Mrs. Chen sat beside her. You did good, the older woman said. We did good. Thank you for hiding Grace, for standing with us. Family stands together. You're family now. And Martha realized it was true. She had family. Not just Caleb and Grace, but Tom and Mrs. Chen, the ranch hands, the patients she treated, the community she'd fought to protect. She belonged here. That night, after everyone left and Grace was tucked in bed, Martha and Caleb sat on the porch, their spot, where everything had started. I love you, Caleb said, Ositisen. I love you too. No regrets, none, you. Only that I didn't find you sooner. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear, the same stars that had watched over them through war and hardship and fear. But now those stars witnessed something else. Peace, joy, future. 5 years passed. Silver Creek Ranch prospered. The cattle herd grew to 800 head. They bought adjacent land expanding to 5,000 acres, hired more hands, built a new barn bigger than the one that had burned. And the family grew. Thomas arrived in 1877, a sturdy boy with Caleb's gray eyes. Charlotte came in 1879, named after Caleb's first wife with Martha's blessing. Then Samuel in 1881, a colicky baby who kept them up for months. The house rang with noise, children running, laughing, fighting, growing. Grace, now 9, helped with the younger ones, and she helped in Martha's medical practice, learning to clean wounds and mix medicines. "I want to be a doctor like you, Mama," she announced one day. "Doctors have to go to medical school. That's hard for women, but not impossible." Martha thought of the things she'd done that were supposed to be impossible. Cross a continent alone, survive a war at 12, save her husband's life with surgery in a canyon. No, not impossible. Hard, but not impossible. "Then I'll do it." And Martha believed her. Caleb at 44 had gray hair and more lines on his face. But he was happy, surrounded by family, building something that would last. One evening as they watched the sunset from the porch, their usual ritual, he said, "Remember when I thought I wanted a quiet house?" Martha laughed. "You got the opposite. I got everything I never knew I needed." So did I. They held hands, wedding rings glinting in the dying light. Two survivors who'd found home. 15 years later, 1891. Grace was 19 and had just received her acceptance letter into medical school in San Francisco. The first woman from Arizona Territory ever accepted. Martha cried reading the letter. Tears of pride and joy and bittersweet knowledge that her daughter was leaving. "Mama, don't cry." Grace hugged her tight. "I couldn't have done this without you. You showed me women can be anything. You showed yourself. I just gave you the tools. You gave me everything. Your strength, your courage, your belief that I could be more than what people expected." The family gathered to see Grace off at the train station, the same platform where Martha had arrived 15 years ago, terrified and alone. Now she stood surrounded by family. Caleb still strong at 49. Thomas, 14, already running ranch operations with his father. Charlotte, 12, a teacher's aide at the local school. Samuel, 10, wild and horse crazy. And Rebecca, 8, serious and bookish. Grace hugged each of them, saved Martha for last. "Make me proud," Martha whispered. "I'll make us all proud." The train pulled away. Martha cried against Caleb's shoulder. "She'll be fine," he said, "and she's your daughter. She knows how to fight." "I know, I just miss her already, I know." And they walked back to the wagon hand in hand, still partners after all these years. 30 years later, 1906, Martha was 56, Caleb 64, slowing down but still vital, still in love. The ranch was an empire now, 10,000 acres, 2,000 head of cattle, 20 employees. But more than that, it was a legacy. Thomas ran the daily operations with his wife Sarah, who'd been a school teacher before they married. They had 4 children who were growing up riding and roping. Grace was Dr. Grace Hayes, practicing medicine in Phoenix, married to a lawyer. 2 children who visited every summer. Charlotte ran the girls' school in town, unmarried by choice, fierce and independent. Samuel was an army officer stationed in the Philippines, writing long letters home. Rebecca had married a doctor and moved to Denver. 3 children, 13 grandchildren total. The family reunion that summer was chaos. Children everywhere, noise and laughter and life. Martha and Caleb sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play, watching the family they'd built from nothing but stubborn will and desperate hope. "We did good," Caleb said. "We did." He took her hand, the same hand he'd held 1,000 times, scarred now, weathered, but still strong. "I love you more today than the day I married you." "Which wedding?" Martha teased. "Both." She leaned into him, comfortable. "Home." A grandchild ran up. Grandma Tommy fell and cut his knee." Martha stood her joints, protesting. Arthritis was setting in, but she grabbed her medical bag, ever present, and went to fix another wound. Because that's what she did. She healed. 40 years later, 1916. Caleb was 74. His heart was failing. They both knew it. He'd lived a good life, longer than most men who'd survived Andersonville, longer than he'd ever expected. Their children gathered, All 5 of them, some with gray hair themselves now. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the house. Caleb lay in bed, Martha beside him, holding his hand like she'd done for 40 years. Martha, his voice was weak. I need to tell you something. Save your strength. No, I need you to know. He struggled to sit up. She helped him. That day you stepped off the train, I thought I was getting a housekeeper, someone to cook and clean, make the house less empty. I know. But you gave me a life, a real life. You gave me children and purpose and joy. You made me believe in love again when I thought I was dead inside. Tears streamed down Martha's face. You saved me too. I was so afraid, so ashamed, and you saw past all of it. I saw you, the real you, and she was magnificent. He died peacefully that night, surrounded by family. His last words were, I love you, Martha, forever and always. Martha sat with his body for a long time after, holding his cooling hand, remembering. The first time she'd seen him on that platform, the way he'd lifted her down from the wagon, so gentle despite his size. The night he'd proposed, the canyon where she'd saved his life, the porch where they'd watched 10,000 sunsets. 40 years of marriage, 5 children, 13 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren, a ranch that would endure for generations. Not bad for a fat mail-order bride and a lonely rancher. 2 years later, 1918, Martha Eleanor Hayes sat on a bench at the Prescott train depot watching her granddaughter Jane prepare to board. Jane was 20, dressed in a nurse's uniform, heading to war. The same age Martha had been when she'd married Caleb. The same age Grace had been when she'd left for medical school. History repeating. Women going to war. Grandma, Jane sat beside her. Tell me again about the dress. So Martha told her about the dress that didn't fit, about crossing a continent on faith, about finding love in an unexpected place, about learning that the things you're most ashamed of can become your greatest strengths. Weren't you scared, Jane asked, when you had to shoot those men? Terrified, but I was more scared of losing the people I loved. I'm scared, too, of the war. Martha took Jane's hands. Her own hands were spotted with age, now joints swollen with arthritis, but still steady when it mattered. Good. Fear keeps you sharp, but don't let it paralyze you. She gave Jane the old medical bag, the one she'd carried from the Civil War to Arizona, the one that had saved Caleb's life. This saved lives in 1863. Let it save lives in 1918. Jane cried, what if I'm not brave enough? You're my granddaughter. You're Grace's daughter. You have 2 generations of brave women in your blood. You'll be fine. The train whistle blew. Jane hugged Martha tight, then boarded. Martha stood on the platform, the same platform where her life had changed 42 years ago. She looked different now. White hair, lined face, body even heavier with age. But she stood tall, confident, at peace. She remembered that day standing before a cracked mirror in the depot, terrified that a dress that didn't fit would ruin her life. She'd been wrong. The dress that didn't fit had led her exactly where she needed to be. Because Caleb hadn't married her for her body, he'd married her for her hands, and her hands had saved lives. She walked back toward home. The ranch was visible in the distance, sprawling and prosperous, a monument to everything she and Caleb had built. She passed the cemetery on the hill, stopped at Caleb's grave beneath the cottonwood tree. Still choosing you, old man, she whispered, touching the headstone. Every day. At the house, great-grandchildren were playing in the yard. Martha's daughter Charlotte lived there now, managing things since Martha's joints made daily work difficult. A small child ran up. Great-grandma, tell us a story, Martha smiled, settled into her rocking chair on the porch. The same porch where she'd fallen in love, where she'd said yes to forever. I'll tell you about the day I became a mail-order bride, she began. The children gathered around, eager for the tale they'd heard 100 times but never tired of. Martha looked out over the valley as she spoke, watched the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky gold and pink. The same sunset she'd watched with Caleb for 40 years. And she felt him there. Not as a ghost, but as a presence in the land they'd built, in the children they'd raised, in the legacy that would outlast them both. People asked her sometimes what she'd learned in all those years. She'd learned that the worst things about you can become the best, that shame is just other people's fear, that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being seen, really seen, and still chosen. She'd expected to be a housekeeper, but she'd become a wife, a mother, a healer, a warrior. And in becoming all those things, she'd become herself, the person she was always meant to be. The sun slipped below the mountains. Stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over her since that first night on the train, terrified and alone. But she wasn't alone anymore, would never be alone again. She was surrounded by family, by love, by the life she'd built from nothing but courage and stubbornness and faith that tomorrow could be better than today. And it had been. God, it had been. Martha Eleanor Hayes closed her eyes and smiled. Sometimes the life you didn't plan is the life you needed all along.